Senator Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, said, "We have the votes, and the Senate will begin voting later today." Three previous Republican holdouts, Senators Jeff Flake of Arizona, Steve Daine of Montana and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, threw their support behind the bill. The bill will now include a $10,000 deduction for state and local property taxes in a bid to sway Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who remains on the fence, an effort by Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee to include future tax increases to offset the deficit impact of the bill appears to have been rejected by Senate leadership. Lawmakers are now considering reinstating a modified version of the alternative minimum tax on individuals and on corporations. The Senate will continue the debate on taxes on Friday. T.J. Kirkpatrick for the New York Times. Republicans close in on passing Senate bill. The Senate has once again regained momentum to pass the Republicans' sweeping tax overhaul, after party leaders picked up the votes of three holdouts: Mr. Flake, Mr. Daine and Mr. Johnson. Mr. McConnell and Senator John Cornyn, the number 2 Senate Republican, said on Friday morning that Republicans had the 50 votes they need to pass the tax bill. Republicans appeared increasingly confident as they milled into the Senate's ornate Strom-Thurmond room to hash out the remaining details of a tax bill that has been a moving target. In spite of their optimism, uncertainty remained. Senator Susan Collins, surrounded by a horde of journalists wielding voice recorders, declared, "I don't know how Senator Cornyn can speak for me, I speak for myself," when told that Mr. Cornyn said he had her vote. Still, lawmakers have agreed to one of Ms. Collins' main requests and will add a $10,000 property tax deduction into the Senate bill. Ms. Collins tweeted that she was "delighted" with the move. "Delighted that the Senate has agreed to include my property tax deduction amendment, that will allow 166,000 Maine taxpayers who itemize to deduct a total of $725 million in property taxes each year." Politics, Sen. Susan Collins at Senator Collins' Dec. 1, 2017. Another wild card is Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who has pushed hard, along with Senator Mike Lee of Utah, for an amendment that would allow more low-income families to claim an expanded child tax credit. To fund that change, Mr. Rubio and Mr. Lee would reduce the size of the cut in the corporate tax rate, landing it at 22% instead of 20%, a change opposed by President Trump. 50 votes would be enough for a victory if Vice President Mike Pence breaks the tie. Mr. Corker and Mr. Flake had pushed to scale back the tax cuts in the Senate bill by as much as a third, in the wake of a report from the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation that projected the bill would add $1 trillion to deficits over the course of a decade, even after accounting for economic growth. Their insistence has angered many Republican colleagues who do not want to reduce the $1.4 trillion tax cut package. On Thursday night, Republicans were discussing several possibilities for changing the bill to address their concerns, including gradually raising the corporate tax rate in later years in order to save as much as $500 billion. On Friday, senators said that idea was off the table. Mr. Trump was optimistic on Friday morning, in a tweet taunting Democrats over the bill's prospects. Republican senators are working hard to pass the biggest tax cuts in the history of our country. The bill is getting better and better. This is a once-in-a-generation chance. Obstructionist Dems trying to block because they think it is too good and will not be given the credit. Donald J. Trump at Real Donald Trump. December 1, 2017. Party leaders gained 3 more votes early Friday. Mr. Daine and Mr. Johnson had objected to the bill because of how it treated pass-through businesses, whose profits are distributed to owners and taxed at individual rates. The Senate tax bill will now allow pass-through owners to deduct 23% of their business income as a way of lowering their taxes, up from 17.4% in the original Senate bill. After weeks of fighting for Main Street businesses including Montana's farmers and ranchers, I've decided to support the Senate tax cut bill, which provides significant tax relief for Main Street businesses. Mr. Daine said in a statement on Friday morning. Mr. Johnson said in a statement he also supports the bill. Mr. Flake, in a statement, said he would support the tax bill after getting changes to a budget gimmick, and that lawmakers would work with him on a legislative solution on deferred action for childhood arrivals. Republicans are coming up with ways to pay for the changes. On Friday, Republicans rejected the idea of putting in place tax increases that would take effect some years from now, a step that would soften the deficit effects of the legislation. Larding the bill up with new tax increases would have been going the wrong direction, said Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas. But lawmakers still need to find ways to pay for the changes being made, and congressional aides said it will likely be a combination of things, including retaining the alternative minimum tax for corporations, retaining a modified version of the individual AMT, slightly increasing the tax rate on offshore assets under the deemed repatriation provision. Another study says tax bill won't pay for itself. The Independent Tax Policy Center said on Friday that the Senate tax bill would add $1.2 trillion to federal deficits over 10 years, even after accounting for increased economic growth. That deficit estimate was slightly higher than the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation projected on Thursday. The so-called dynamic score from the center found that the bill, as approved in the Finance Committee, would increase economic growth by 0.7% next year, but that its growth boost would fade over a decade, as deficits and federal debt increase. The center said those benefits would be larger if the economy was struggling, and not operating under low unemployment. Because the economy is currently near employment, the impact of increased demand on output would be smaller and diminish more quickly than it would if the economy were in recession. Republican senators have criticized the center's previous findings and largely dismissed the Joint Committee's analysis on Thursday. They say they expect much larger growth effects than the analyses have found. The Independent Tax Foundation, which typically finds higher growth effects from tax cuts, has not yet released an analysis of the bill after it underwent significant amendments in committee.